Where does superstition come from? Are you afraid of black cats? Would you open an umbrella indoors? And how do you feel about the number 13? Whether or not you believe in them, you're probably familiar with a few of these superstitions. So how does happen when people all over the world knock on the wood or avoid stepping on sidewalk cracks? Well, although they have no basis in science, many of these weird specific beliefs and practices do have equally weird and specific origins. Because they involve supernatural causes, it's no surprise that many superstitions are based on religions. For example, the number 13 was associated with the biblical Last Supper, where Jesus Christ dined with his 12 disciples just before being arrested and crucified. The religious idea that having 13 people at a table was a bad luck eventually expands into 13, being an unlucky number in general. Now, this fear of number 13, called tricholophobia, is so common that many buildings around the world skip the 13th floor, with the numbers going straight from 12 to 14. Of course, many people consider the story of Last Supper the true, but the other superstitions come from the religious traditions that few people believe in or even remember. Knocking on wood is thought to come from the folklore of the ancient Indo-Europeans, or possibly people who predated them, who believed the tree were home to various spirits. Touching a tree would involve the protection or blessing of the spirit within. And somehow these traditions survived long after the spirits have faded away. Many superstitions common today in countries from Russia to Ireland are those of women and the paper religions that Christianity replaced. But not all superstitions are religions. Some are just based on unfortunate coincidences and associations. For example, many Italians fear this number 17 because the Roman number XVIA can be rearranged to form a word vixi, meaning my life had ended. Similarly, the words for number 4 sounds almost identical to the words for death in Cantonese, as well as languages like Japanese and Korean that have borrowed Chinese numerals. And since the number 1 also sounds like the word for must, the number 14 sounds like a phrase must die. That's a lot of numbers for elevator and international hotels to avoid. And believe it or not, some superstitions actually make sense, or at least they did until we forgot their original purpose. For example, theater singers discussed on large painted backdrops, maids and lords by a stretched hand who would whistle to signal each other. Absent-minded whistles from other people because accident, but the taboo against whistling backstage will still exist today, long after stage hands started using radio headsets. Along with the same lines, lighting 3 signals from the same match really could cause backlog. If you were a soldier in a foxhole, where keeping a match is too long could draw attention from an enemy sniper, most smokers no longer have to worry about snipers, but superstitions live on. So why do people climb on these big forgotten religions, coincidences, and outdated advice? Are they being totally irrational? Well, yes. But for many people, superstitions are based more on cultural habits than conscious belief. After all, no one is born in knowledge to avoid walking under ladder or whistling indoors. But if you grow up being told by your family to avoid these things, changes are to make you uncomfortable even after you logically understand that nothing bad will happen. And since doing something like knocking on wood doesn't require much effort, following the superstition is often easier than consciously resisting it. Besides, superstitions often do seem to work. Maybe remember hitting a Haran away lucky socks. This is just our psychological bias at work. You'll follow less to remember all the time you're struck out while you're wearing same socks. But believing that work could actually make your play better by giving you the illusion of having greater control over events. So, in situations where this confidence can make the difference, like sports, those crazy superstitions might not be so crazy after all. Want more? Are you afraid of black cats? Would you open an umbrella indoors? And how do you feel about the number 13? Whether or not you believe in that, you're probably familiar with a few of these superstitions. So, how did it happen that when people all over the world knock on wood or avoid stepping on sidewalk cracks? Well, although they have no basis in science, many of these really specific beliefs and practices do have equally weird and specific origins. Because they involve supernatural causes, it's no surprise that many superstitions are based on religion. For example, the number 13 was associated with the biblical Last Supper, where Jesus Christ dined with the 12 disciples just before being arrested and crucified. The original idea that having 13 people at a table was bad luck eventually expanded into 13 being an unlucky number in general. Now, this fear of the number 13, called triskaidekaphobia, is so common that many buildings around the world skip the 13th floor, with the number going straight for 12 to 14. Of course, many people consider the story of Last Supper to be true, but other suspicions come from the religious traditions that few people believe in or even remember. Knocking on wood is thought to come from the folklore of the ancient Indo-Europeans, or possibly people who predate them, who believed the tree were home to various spirits. Touching the tree would involve the protection or blessing of the spirit within. And somehow these two traditions abound long after belief in spirits have faded away. Many superstitions common today in countries from Russia to Ireland are thought-built remnants of the pagan religions that Christianity replaces. But not both superstitions are religions. Some are just based on overarching coincidences and associations. For example, many Italians fear the number 17 because the rumor XCVII can be rearranged for former words vixi, meaning my life had ended. Similarly, the words for the number 4 sounds almost identical to words for death in Cantonese, as well as languages like Japanese and Korean that have borrowed Chinese rumors. And since the number 1 also sounds like the word for must, the number 14 sounds like the phrase must die. That's a lot of numbers for elevators for international hotels to avoid. And believe it or not, some superstitions actually make sense, or at least they did until we forgot the original purpose. For example, theater scenery used to consist of large painted backdrops, raised and lowered by stagists who would whistle to signal to each other. Absent-minded whistling from other people could cause an accident, but the taboo against whistling backstage still exists today, long after stagehands started using radio headsets. Along the same lines, lighting 3 signals from the same match really could cause a bad luck. If you are a soldier in a foxhole, your keeping a match too long could draw attention from enemy snipers. Most smokers no longer have to worry about the snipers, but the superstition lives on. So why do people claim to speak of forgotten religions, coincidences, and all these advice? Are they totally irrational? Well, yes. But for many people, superstitions are based on moral or cultural headache. After all, no one's born knowing to avoid walking under ladders or whistling indoors. But if you grow up being told by your family to avoid these things, chances are things make you uncomfortable even after your lost screen to understand that nothing bad will happen. And since doing something like knocking with wood doesn't require much effort, following the superstition is often easier than consciously resisting it. Besides, superstitions often do seem to work. Maybe remember hitting a home run while wearing your lucky socks. This is just our psychological bias at work. You follow less likely to remember all the time you struck out while wearing the same socks. But believing they work could actually make your play better by giving you an illusion of having great control over events. So, in situations where the confidence can make the difference, like sports, those crazy superstitions might not be so crazy after all.